Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm Dr. Aletha Marie Harven. You can call me Dr. Harven or by my first name, Aletha. And I'm so happy that you are all here today because we have a very important topic to discuss. So, as you know, this is my third season of my webinar series, Transformative Conversations Promoting Equity and Inclusion in Education and Beyond. And today is one of 3 sessions for my special series titled Black and Jewish Voices, Exploring the Kanye West and Kyrie Irving Controversy. So as you know, today's session is going to focus on anti-Semitism. Tomorrow, Thursday, that session is going to focus on Black and Jewish history, trauma, and collective liberation. And the session will start at the same time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then the last session, the third session, will be on Friday, and the focus would be on critiquing accountability and justice as it relates to Kanye and Kyrie. So thank you again for showing up today. I really appreciate it. And I want to go ahead and introduce my guest today. Teresa Drenick from the Anti-Defamation League is here to talk with us about anti-Semitism. I want to go ahead and give her a proper introduction. Teresa Drenick joined ADL's Central Pacific region as the Deputy Director in August 2021, where she has an array of responsibilities relating to ADL's work fighting hate for good, including bias incident response, leadership development, and media relations. Prior to joining the ADL, Teresa dedicated 30 years of her career to promoting justice in the Bay Area as Assistant District Attorney for Alameda County. At the DA's office, she held a variety of positions, including trial attorney, public information officer, and head of the domestic violence unit. Teresa also created the DA's truancy and attendance unit, which is a model program that brings together schools, community-based organizations, and the courts to address chronic absenteeism. Many of us are educators who are on today, and so we all know that absenteeism is an issue in our schools. She also spearheaded the Justice Academy, an award-winning experiential program for high school students interested in the law. And as a prosecutor, she never lost sight of the impact of the criminal justice system on all those involved, including the victims and the accused. Teresa graduated cum laude from Georgetown University and received her law degree from the School of Law at the University of California, San Francisco. Welcome, Teresa. What I'd like to do now is position myself in this conversation. As many of you know who follow my series, I sometimes like to just ask questions and listen to the speakers, and other times I interject my opinion a little bit more. So in positioning myself, I am approaching this conversation as a learner, and I also want to always be flexible in my understanding of different topics. And I feel that I can always learn from other people. So anyone I interact with, I can learn from them. So that's how I want to position myself as a learner. My first question for Teresa will help her to position herself in this conversation as well. So Teresa, I'm ready to pose my first question to you. But before I do that, I just want to make a note to all of the audience members. As I'm talking, if you have any questions that you want to pose for Teresa or for me, please place your questions in the Q&A box so that I can see them. And also, I will not be reading your names, just in case you want me to protect your privacy, of course, because I am recording this session. Thanks. Okay, Teresa, my first question for you. Can you tell us more about who you are, your background, including what inspires you to help others, and what has led to your work at the Anti-Defamation League?
Thank you. Yes. So as you and I got to know each other a little bit over the last several weeks, I've told you about my background. I grew up in Los Angeles, and both my mom and my dad were born Jewish and were born in Europe before World War II. And both my mom's family, her mom and her dad got out of Eastern Europe just in the 30s, so in time to escape the Holocaust. And my dad and his brother grew up in Vienna, and really had something a movie could be made out of, really an escape from Austria, just in the nick of time. And so I grew up in a family that, while Jewish in Los Angeles, was not very religious at all, but the enormity of the Holocaust and what happened to our relatives who didn't get out of Europe and perished in the concentration camps was always alive in my mind and my heart and my family's consciousness. And I grew up with a beloved aunt who we saw all the time, who was a survivor of Auschwitz. And she lived maybe 5 minutes from us. She was part of the fabric of my very intimate family. And so this was always something present to me as a young person growing up, and then as a student as I went through university and law school. I did go into the prosecutor's office, and there I found a really rich career, in large part focused on crimes where I felt like I could really roll up my sleeves and work intimately with victims of crime. So I spent a lot of time in the domestic violence unit, where I really felt that I made a difference for largely women who suffered abuse, to families who lost somebody to a murder, and also to children who had suffered sometimes just crimes that you can't even imagine and don't want to imagine. And eventually I turned my attention to proactively trying to address the criminality that I had seen for years and decades. And we talked a little bit about the truancy program, which was focused 100% on working holistically with families to make sure their kids could go to school. Then, as we all know, over the past several years, maybe since 2016 especially, there has been this explosion of hate and anti-Semitism in our country and also around the world. And the larger that loomed, the more I was drawn to and pulled toward a new career, and left the DA's office about a little over a year ago to join the Anti-Defamation League, where I feel that I can take my experience in legal thinking, for sure, and working with people who've been harmed and addressing that kind of intimate harm, and focusing it in a new way. Just real briefly, that for those who might not know, ADL is the oldest anti-hate organization in the United States. We were formed in 1913 at a time, of course, well before the rise of the Nazi Party and World War II, but at a time where here in the United States, anti-Semitism was really on the rise. But importantly, our founding mandate, which we are very proud of to this day, is to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. So we are a civil rights organization that focuses on just that, on the fair treatment of all people.
Thank you, Teresa, for telling us more about yourself and giving us more information on your background. It really helps to put everything into context. I appreciate you sharing what you shared. Thank you. Before we move into discussing some of the controversy that we've been seeing in the media, I want to talk about anti-Semitism. So I have a few questions for you regarding it. What is anti-Semitism? What behaviors are considered anti-Semitic? And can you provide examples? The reason I'm asking you to do this is because I want to make sure that the audience is on the same page about what anti-Semitism is, and also based on what has been happening in the media regarding anti-Semitism, I've been hearing a number of people say that they're not totally sure the extent to which certain behaviors are anti-Semitic. And so I was just wondering if you could give us more information.
Sure. So there are, textbook definitions of anti-Semitism, and maybe we want to start with one that is most widely used. It was adopted in 2016 by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And I'm just going to read it, which is that anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards the Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. Now that is the formal IRA definition. I was speaking to a class of 9th graders yesterday at a high school here in the Bay Area, and I posed the question to them of what they think is anti-Semitism, and a young man raised his hand and he said, it's when people hate Jewish people and the Jewish community. So that was a 9th grader's pretty spot-on distillation of the IRA definition. Anti-Semitism is a form of bias and a form of oppression that oftentimes punches up at its target. And anti-Semitism, like all other forms of bias and bigotry, is both pervasive and also at times it's very subtle. And some of the examples that we see of anti-Semitism are really age-old, and they are drawn from myths and lies about the Jewish people that date back millennia. So a few of those that are as old as time, yet active, and we see them today and often in the controversies that we're talking about, is this myth of power, that anti-Semitism, it manifests often in a way of this through a conspiratorial lens, in which it's assumed or thought that Jewish people have more influence or control or power over world events, over huge institutions such as banking institutions, the media, or the government. So this myth of power and control. There's also a myth of greed, and the idea that that the community is driven by money at the over all else. And another pernicious and incredibly hurtful myth and anti-Semitic trope involves Holocaust denial or Holocaust minimalization or trivialization. And we see this a lot, especially I would point out during the first year of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, when there was a lot of work towards public health safety, such as masking mandates or mandates that people get vaccinated. And we saw elected officials around our country who were unhappy with that, going to city council meetings or school board meetings, donning the Yellow Star of David, which was, as I think the audience all knows, the star that Jewish people were forced to wear in the build-up to the Holocaust, at literally a penalty of death. So if they were walking down the street without that, they could be shot and killed. And as a protest for a masking mandate, folks are drawing that equivalency that the state was somehow treating them as the Jews were treated in the Holocaust. We saw the huge banners bearing swastika, Nazi swastikas, the symbol of the Nazi party, at these rallies. Again, minimizing, trivializing, and at times actual denying the Holocaust is a pernicious and all too often common form of anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Teresa, for that explanation. It was very thorough, and I really liked hearing what you had to say. And this actually brings me to wanting to talk about a hate crime that occurred on my campus recently. So I want to inform you about it and the audience, and I'd like to get your thoughts. So on November 14th, 2022, there was vandalism near one of the major classroom buildings on my campus, where red paint was used to draw a swastika and write the letters KKK on the ground. The facility staff removed the images, and our campus police investigated the situation, identifying a juvenile suspect. Our campus police department worked with our local police department to find the suspect, who admitted to the vandalism. Appropriate action is taking place at this time. In terms of prevention, why do you think hate crimes like the one that occurred on my campus continue to happen? And what more can be done to ensure that another young person, or anyone for that matter, doesn't engage in this type of behavior?
It's a great question. Thank you for sharing that example. And unfortunately, it's not a unusual occurrence. We have at ADL a way online that people can upload incidents of bias, anti-Semitism and bias that have occurred. And I think that there has not been a week since I have worked here that we haven't heard from a school, whether it's a university campus or a high school campus or even a middle school campus, where something, a student or a staff member discovers a swastika or some other symbol of hate on the campus. So it's pervasive and incredibly troubling. Why do I think that it is happening at such a heightened level right now? I think it's a combination of phenomena. First, we see that there is this normalization of hate taking place in our country, and normalization of anti-Semitism. We see incredibly powerful and important people, such as, and we know we'll get into this a little bit later, but such as Ye and the former president and others socializing with each other, and at the same time spewing vicious anti-Semitic rhetoric. We see it online in social media platforms. We see it in gaming platforms, a lot of places where young people are. In the same class that I taught yesterday, we talked about this a little bit, and these were, again, 9th graders. And I asked them, what they're seeing, and all of them talked to me about TikTok and video games that they're playing, and the amount. One boy said kids are always doing Heil Hitlers in his video game in the chat rooms, and posting these really awful things on TikTok, and you hear it enough and you see it enough and you're around it enough, and especially as a young person, it becomes far too normal, and you're far too inured to it. And I think that there's also this incredibly disturbing lack of knowledge of what happened specifically to Jewish people in the Holocaust and others. I don't know if it's because it's not being taught well enough in school or thoroughly enough in school. But there was a study that came out about 1.5 years ago, and I have some really interesting statistics to share with your audience. Among adults 40 years and younger, so we're looking at younger people, there was 1 out of 10, so 10% of this, it was a huge survey study, 10% had never heard the word Holocaust. In this survey, looking at, again, mostly millennials and Gen Z folks, showed that many were unclear about the basic facts. 63% of those surveyed did not know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. And over half of those who were questioned thought the death toll was less than 2 million. There were thousands of camps and ghettos established around Europe during World War II, and nearly half of the respondents could not name a single one by name. They had never heard Auschwitz, for example. And not only was there this enormous amount of ignorance of what happened during the Holocaust, but Holocaust outright denial. 90% of the respondents said that they believe the Holocaust happened. So 10% didn't. Of that 10%, 7 were not sure. 3% denied that it happened altogether. And one of the most disturbing revelations is that 11% of the respondents believed that Jews were the ones who were the cause of the Holocaust. So when you have that kind of lack of understanding and lack of knowledge and lack of education in this wide swath of young people in this country, it's no wonder that there's a lack of compassion and a lack of understanding of how hurtful and how harmful it is when they spray paint or carve a swastika or do a Heil Hitler in a school hallway. And we also know that because of their age, the last of our precious survivors of the Holocaust are passing away. You know, it was by just the nature of time. And so our firsthand accounts, people who can go into a classroom and sit down with kids and talk about their own experience, is fleeting, which leaves us with a generation that will have zero firsthand knowledge and is the generation that is going to soon be having children of their own and not having the ability or know-how or knowledge to teach and sensitize their own kids. And millennials and Gen Zers, these are the parents of tomorrow, these are the teachers of tomorrow. So we really need to make sure that these history lessons are taught and understood, and the gravity and enormity are really made clear. And I want to, on this, I have a really beautiful quote from Deborah Littstadt, who's a Holocaust scholar and also recently was appointed special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism here in the United States. She has the title now of ambassador. And she says, when you learn the history of the Holocaust, you are not simply learning about the past. These lessons remain relevant today in order to understand not only anti-Semitism, but all the other isms of society. There is a real danger to letting them fade.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for all that you said. The statistics that you provided were very eye-opening and interesting, and you're absolutely right. More education needs to be provided to our young people. I also liked the quote that you read, so thank you so much for what you shared. Now, we do have a lot of educators in the audience, and in terms of Holocaust education for young people, or anyone for that matter, what can educators do in order to feel more comfortable in discussing what happened? So I'm bringing this up because I do remember when I was in high school learning about the Holocaust, and there were a variety of ways that I was learning about it, and there were various conversations that were being had around it. But I also remember being in one class in particular where we were engaged in readings about the Holocaust, and some students were engaged in the class and in the readings and other students weren't so engaged in the discourse. For me personally, I was always that student who was pretty much on top of things. So I was reading and I was actively involved, but uh, this makes me think about what educators can do, not only to feel more comfortable teaching about this topic, teaching about the Holocaust, but also gaining the knowledge that they need to feel confident in teaching about it, and also ensuring that students are going to be engaged, right, in the discourse surrounding it and in developing empathy in regards to what happened.
You're right. It has to be taught in a empathetic way and an engaging way, so it doesn't seem like something that happened, hundreds of years ago, that's so far removed. ADL we have an education department within our organization that is filled with amazing educators and amazing resources. So first and foremost, I say come to us. We have, come to our website, give us a call. We go to schools to do anti-bias and anti-Semitism education and training on a regular basis. It's part of the core mission and core of our work. So if there are schools or educators that face this, or parent groups, we welcome you, and we want to partner. So that would be one resource that I would very readily have to offer. And, in addition to that, I think that there is a wealth of incredible materials out there that, that are good for any age. If young kids are not going to have the same ability to absorb and understand and process as students at the university or grad school level, obviously. But there are so many books out there and so many films and documentaries, it's not hard to find engaging material that also teaches.
Right. Thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate everything that you just said, and you're absolutely right. The ADL does have a lot of resources that educators can tap into, and also there's so much information that's available at our fingertips today. We can just go online and find a lot of really engaging material, and also conduct research, right? Go to the library. There's just a lot of different ways to gather really great information in order to present to students. And like you said, there are a number of engaging ways to get students interested in this topic because it's such an important topic. So something else that comes to mind for me in my work with educators, and just a number of different people, is the idea of I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing, right? So I hear this sometimes when it comes to, let's say, people being encouraged to talk about hate crimes or the Holocaust or other really sensitive topics. Sometimes I will hear people say, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do a disservice. So what's your advice when educators are afraid to approach sensitive topics such as, let's say, anti-Semitism or talking about the Holocaust because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing?
Well, I think it's more important to not approaching it at all is absolutely doing the wrong thing, and saying nothing is the worst thing that a person can do. So I think an educator, like, turn to a trusted colleague, do a dry run, have a small session with people who you're not afraid of making a mistake with. You don't feel that they're going to judge you, and have some back and forth and some critical conversations. But I think it's much more important to delve into sensitive topics and just be very honest and say right off the bat, I don't want to say anything that is hurtful or offensive or make somebody feel uncomfortable. And please tell me if I do, and please pardon me if I do, but these are sensitive topics, and talking about race is sensitive, and people do get hurt and do feel uncomfortable. Yet if we don't talk about it and we don't face the issues that are exploding in our country today, and we don't learn how to have an honest and open dialogue, things are just going to get worse.
Right. And I agree with you. I always tell people you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like what you said about just being honest with people about, or I should say with the students, you know, that you teach, or whoever you're working with, just to kind of be honest about where you're coming from, what your knowledge is. It's okay if you don't have all of the knowledge on a particular topic, but I think that level of honesty is really helpful in growing with, let's say, your students and learning together about it. So you're right. I think it's better to say something than to not say anything at all.
Right. Because when you stay silent, that speaks volumes. Like the silence is really loud.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to turn our attention to talking about safety as it relates to hate crimes. So when a hate crime occurs, like on my college campus and any other college campus or school campus for that matter, or if a hate crime occurs off campus in the community, what can be done to make people feel safe? So as you might know, sometimes people don't feel safe going back to a particular building or location, depending on what the hate crime was. So I'm wanting to know what more can be done, let's say by school administrators, to really ensure the safety of everybody on campus. On my campus, when this recent hate crime occurred, I do feel that campus administrators were quick to respond. Campus PD was quick to respond. Facilities responded very quickly. And also there was an email that was sent out to my entire campus community, letting us know what had happened and what is currently going on with the situation. So I did appreciate receiving that email. And while that did make me feel better knowing like what's kind of happening with the situation, I know that there may still be some people who feel unsafe. So yeah, I was just wanting to know, beyond what my campus has already done, for instance, which I think is good, is there anything else, any other suggestions that you would have in regards to safety?
So I'm glad to hear that your campus is taking it seriously and doing the right thing. I think that first and foremost, when a hate incident takes place on a campus, and let's be clear on this, that sometimes a hateful incident doesn't rise to the level of criminal activity. So what happened when you said that, about the spray painting on your campus, that's a vandalism, that is a criminal activity. But sometimes there can be hate speech, for example, that, as harmful and scary and terrifying as it may be, it's not actually a crime, but it still needs to be just as noticed and noted by the school administration. And so when something takes place, whether it is a hate crime or a hate-filled incident or hate-fueled incident, I think that the administration needs to call it what it was and be very upfront with the students and with the administration and with the faculty about what happened and the details of it. So for example, we were working with a school where there was a swastika spray painted, and the messaging that initially came out from the school administration to the parent body and the student body was that there was an act of vandalism. Well, yes, there was an act of vandalism, but it was an anti-Semitic hate crime involving a swastika. And if you don't say that, it does many things. It leaves the community that is most affected feeling as though that it wasn't taken very seriously. It makes the community at large feel like they are not being told the truth or the whole truth about something that happened, and that something is being hidden from them. So I think I'd call it what it was. Tell everybody what happened, call it out, and do that very swiftly. Don't wait until the rumor mill starts to speculate and that the pictures go around on social media and the buzz gets louder and louder, and then it looks like the school is catching up with everybody else who already knows what's happening. Like I say, don't minimize it, and also have at the very outset of the school year, whether it's a high school setting or a college setting, a very clear set of what will happen to somebody who is caught doing a hate crime or causing some kind of hateful incident to take place. What are the consequences to that student? What are the consequences to the faculty member? And then whether it is an anti-Semitic incident or an anti-Black biased incident, it should be treated equally as stringently, and everybody should know what to expect. So I think that with those guidelines and swift action, you can make your community feel much safer because they feel like you care about them and you're taking care of them.
I absolutely agree. And I think those are really great guidelines. So I want to turn our attention now to talking about Kanye West and Kyrie Irving. I don't know how much we'll be able to really get into because of time, but I did mention at the beginning of our talk that we would be discussing both men. So whatever we do not cover in this session, I will be sure to cover in my other sessions, everyone. Okay, so Teresa, when you and I had touched base about the controversy surrounding both Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, I know you were wanting to talk a little bit more about Kanye, to focus your attention a little bit more there because of the new developments that we're seeing. So let's talk about that, right? So we have recently seen Kanye West in the media with former President Donald Trump and now Nick Fuentes. And I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on what we're witnessing right now in relation to these men?
Thank you. So as we all know, over the last several, more or less 4 weeks, the country has heard from the artist formerly known as Kanye West, or Ye, with some really disturbing statements about Jewish people, including the fact that he wanted to go DESCON 3 on the Jews. And he leaned very deeply into some of these stereotypes that we talked about earlier. And he created this megaphone for his followers, and they amplified his words. So I'm not a statistician, but I am told that Ye has more, or did have more Twitter followers than there are Jewish people alive in the entirety of the world. So here he is, this incredibly huge star, huge influence over young people, over his fans, and his spewing of the hatred towards the Jewish people really allowed a lot of others to express similar feelings. It has this normalizing effect that is pretty astounding. And in the wake of his comments, we saw a super anti-Semitic group hang huge banner over the 405 freeway in LA saying Kanye is right about the Jews. That same group did sort of like a laser light projection on the wall of a sports arena saying the same thing. We have seen a huge spike in chatter on, social media channels, amplifying his voice and amplifying his message. And then last week, right before Thanksgiving, we see that he is dining at Mar-a-Lago with our former president, and one of the preeminent white supremacists in the country, this young man named Nick Fuentes. So here are these three men breaking bread together at Donald Trump's home, really, because he lives at Mar-a-Lago. And how can anybody not see that the three of them are amplifying each other, are supporting each other, and are accepting the views of each other? And Nick Fuentes, this white supremacist, not only is he anti-Semitic and a Holocaust denier, abject Holocaust denier, but he is also incredibly racist, hateful towards the LGBTQ plus community, and misogynistic. He has, come out and said that men should feel free to hit their wives, that, the hateful spewing that comes from his mouth is beyond the pale. And to think that now the man who was our president, perhaps one of the most powerful politicians in our country, is eating dinner with him. What does that tell people? What does that tell people who are already haters? It lets them just, let that flag fly of hatred. It's astounding. And now with Twitter and its new owner, people are being let back on who rightfully were not allowed on that platform, because the viciousness and the viciousness that their words could unleash were really, really dangerous. And all of a sudden they're being let back on. And then with Kyrie Irving, what he did was he tweeted out a link and an approval of a movie that pretends to be a documentary and is also a Holocaust denying movie. And what I see there is, again, another example of the power of celebrity, in that after he did that and it was noted, the amount of hits on Amazon and the searches on Amazon for that movie exploded. And now, if you go on to Amazon and you type in the first few letters of the title of that movie, HE, suddenly it appears for you. And so he took something that was like, sort of living in obscurity and broadcasted it, and now it's no longer in obscurity. So the power of celebrity is huge. Words matter a lot, and the words that they're using are just being amplified, and then eventually we're going to start seeing, I believe, more acts of violence coming out of it. Not so long ago, we had that shooting in Buffalo, New York, at the supermarket in a Black neighborhood, and the shooter was a believer in this great replacement theory, which is a theory that Jewish people are aiding and abetting basically the replacement of white Europeans by bringing in immigrants and working with the Black community, and that somehow we are all involved in this conspiracy to replace the white people in this country. So these theories and these ideas and this hate goes from, somebody's thoughts to discussion, to online chatter, to media chatter with television stations, to suddenly horrendous acts of violence.
Okay.
That was a long answer to that question. And I could talk about this for a really long time.
Right.
And I know that we're running short on time, but I do want to say that I feel like it's just so important, and I realize that you have speakers coming on in the weeks or the days ahead that are going to talk about the history between our two communities, the Black community and the Jewish community, and how much we've worked together in the past. But I really think that cannot be said enough, and it really needs to be understood and studied and revered and emulated, because we do have a really incredibly rich history of helping each other and backing each other and moving mountains for each other. And we need to remember that.
Thank you for saying that, Teresa. And, I do appreciate what you said. And thank you for letting us know your thoughts on both Kanye West and Kyrie Irving. I have so many questions now that I want to ask you, but I won't because of time. But I do have a follow-up question for you. It's in regards to a conversation that we had about Kanye West and Donald Trump. So when it came to Donald Trump, I remember you mentioned how you felt that he opened the floodgates of hate. And I remember when you said that, I was thinking about Charlottesville and some other incidents that surrounded his presidency. And so I was wondering if you wanted to address that.
Yeah, it seems that since the 16, since he ran and then won his presidency, that he did allow the floodgates to open of hatred and bigotry. And in the Charlottesville, the rally in Charlottesville, the white supremacist rally, where the chant was "Jews shall not replace us," and a woman lost her life in the counter protest, and then the president said that there were good folks on each side, rather than just outright condemning this. And the presidency just went on with this. It didn't end. His allowing of the hatred and allowing of the bigotry and the racism and the anti-Semitism, and culminated obviously in the January 6th insurrection, where you saw some of the insurrectionists wearing Camp Auschwitz t-shirts and bearing flags with a Nazi swastika on them, and terribly racist and homophobic slogans. So it really bookended this presidency, right, in terms of the way that he allowed for the treatment of other people. And I'll say that I had a couple of quotes, the one that I shared from Deborah Lipstat's earlier, and then another from Vanderbilt professor Michael Eric Dyson, who is incredibly eloquent and insightful, and he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and I wanted just to read this quote to you along these lines, which is, "Yea, Irving and the rest of us would do well to remember that African Americans and Jews are passengers on the same ship, facing ferocious headwinds of bigotry and hatred." And I think that he just says that so well, that the white supremacist and extremist forces in this country, they love the idea of dividing and conquering between different groups, because it's doing their job somewhat for them. And also, we share as communities that we are equally hated and reviled by these extremists, and we need to stick together.
Thank you, Teresa, for what you said and for reading that quote. And you're right, there does seem to be some disunity to some extent between our two communities right now. And there has been disunity at different points throughout history. However, there has been unity between our two communities, and it is important for us to continue to strengthen the relationship between our two communities. I think that's going to be really important moving forward. Okay, so due to time, I want to shift our attention just a bit to talking about Kanye West and his mental health status. So obviously, Kanye West has made some controversial comments that no one can deny, and he does need to take responsibility, right, for his comments and his behavior. However, I was recently talking to a colleague of mine who happens to be a clinical psychologist about Kanye West and mental illness. And so as we were talking, she actually put together a statement to contribute to our discussion today, and I would like to read her statement. So her name is Dr. Jessica Lambert, and again, she's a clinical psychologist, and she has never been in contact with Kanye West. She has never treated Kanye West. So I just wanted to make sure that I put that out there. But I'm going to go ahead and read her statement. And I quote, "Mental illness involves the dysregulation of emotion and impaired cognitive functioning. Mhm. People suffering with bipolar disorder are not often able to think rationally or clearly when they are particularly experiencing a manic episode, for example. That doesn't excuse inappropriate behavior, but it is important for us to have compassion." End quote. So Kanye West has publicly, to some extent, made mention of his mental health status. I actually found an interview online where he was talking about his mental health challenges, and he didn't go into a great deal of detail. It was very brief. However, there was a psychologist who provided some commentary regarding it. And, you know, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about Kanye West and his mental health in relation to what we are witnessing?
So I'm not a professional in this field, obviously, and I think that um, I agree. I mean, people who are struggling with mental health deserve compassion, and I always hope that they can get the help that they need and seek the help that they should be getting. But nonetheless, there is so a few things about that. The statements that he made and repeatedly made about the hateful statements, it was not a one-time. Sorry, I've got a dog here. It was not a one-off. It seemed as though that was repeated and then echoed again. And he certainly had plenty of time for some quiet contemplation, to talk to people, to seek out professional help, to talk to family or loved ones. And it doesn't seem that there has been any sort of contrition or admission of mea culpa. Also, yes, there may be a person who is suffering from mental health issues that says something that sparks then a repeat and a kind of like a cascading waterfall of hate that other people latch onto. So I think we have to be really cognizant and careful that we don't say, well, just because a certain person has challenges or has mental health challenges, that what they say doesn't carry severity, because it does. And especially when the person has such a huge following, such a huge megaphone, so to speak, and we see his or her messages then repeated and repeated ad nauseum throughout cyberspace and throughout the actual world.
Thank you for your response, Teresa. I appreciate it. Okay, so there's a question from an audience member, and I want to bring this up to you because this has to do with Ye or Kanye's recent discussion of his own identity. So the question is, if you claim to be an Israelite and make anti-Jewish comments, does it constitute as anti-Semitism? So again, this came from the audience.
So yes.
Okay.
So a person, first of all, I'm not sure that the audience member is the person saying if you claim to be a Jew, or you claim, there's a whole nother conversation that we can have here about this notion that European or Ashkenazi Jews aren't, it's the belief of this one group that they're not real Jews. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time, and it's deep and also filled with anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes. But yes, I would say that certain people, can say anti-Semitic things and can be anti-Semitic, even regardless of who they are.
Okay.
And what they say can be just as hurtful.
Thank you, Teresa. And I have another question for you. It's in relation to Kyrie Irving and what you said about him earlier. So I want to talk about Kyrie Irving and how he shared a link to a documentary on his Twitter account. And so my understanding is that there was no context surrounding the tweet. He just sent the tweet out with the link to the movie. And when I listened to him talk during his press conferences, with one of the press conferences, he was saying that he was conducting a search, and he's all about enlightenment and learning more about himself. And so he was engaged in this research and came across this particular documentary and then decided to share it with his online community. And so I understand where you're coming from with saying that he's a basketball star, and so he has a lot of reach, which is true, right? If he posts something, people are going to pay attention to it. There are also people who are saying that the media really, pushed people into watching this film more. And so there are a number of people who are saying, I stand with Kyrie, right? And so I'm just wondering how you feel about the people who are saying that Kyrie didn't do anything wrong, and they're saying, I stand with Kyrie, because a number of people are saying that.
So I think that when you are very famous, great responsibility goes with that. And when you have millions of followers and you are respected and revered by millions of people because of who you are, and it was a choice that you made to go into a profession that engenders fame, right? That you can't back away or say, well, I posted something, but that doesn't mean that I'm inviting people to look at it or that I am promoting it, because that rings just so false to me. When somebody who is that famous posts a link to a book, to an article, to a movie, to a concert, to anything, their followers and their admirers are understandably going to think that they're promoting that, because there's not really another way of explaining it unless there is some context to put around it and contextualizing, like I condemn this, or this is something, please don't believe what it said in this movie, or don't believe what it said in this article, and there's a condemnation that goes along with it, that might be different. But to post a link to any other form of media when you are the star that he is, in and of itself is promoting that movie. And I think it's really hard to argue any other way.
Well, thank you so much, Teresa, for answering all of these questions that I have posed. I know that everyone's interested in hearing from you, so I really, really do appreciate you. And I do see more questions here in the Q&A, so I thought we could just go through the questions. I'd love to hear your responses. So here's a question. I haven't been in K-12 in over 20 years and don't have children in K-12. I'm wondering if they are still requiring literature such as Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, as required reading in K-12.
So there is still a requirement, at least here in California, that students have some Holocaust education. And I know that a lot of schools are still reading Anne Frank, and some are reading Night by Elie Wiesel, especially in the middle school. And I would also say that the Governor Newsom, just established a council on Holocaust and genocide education. And that is based upon some legislation promoted by and written by the Anti-Defamation League that many states are now adopting, and we hope many more will, because of the need for an increase, as we've talked about earlier, genocide and Holocaust education. So I don't know that they are mandated reading, to answer your listener's question, but I do know that many schools still have them on the reading list. And then on the other hand, we're seeing some really incredible books. Mao's, for example, which is a graphic novel, being banned in many school libraries and in many schools around the country. So there's a lot of backsliding too, in terms of children, young people being exposed to really important pieces of literature.
Thank you, Teresa. And there's another question here. And this one has to do with when we were talking about hate crimes. Okay. So here's the question. I agree with calling it what it is. However, if you share details of a hate crime when informing the community, is there a danger of there being copycats?
That's a great question. And I think that, yes, there probably is that danger, but in the weight and balance of making sure that the community knows that the school is taking it seriously, the administration is focused on what happened and how it affects the community, I think that weighs more heavily than the fear of the copycat. I also have that question come to me sometimes from the media when a news, either a newspaper or a TV station wants to do a story about, for example, like that banner drop over the 405, and they say, aren't we just sort of feeding into the frenzy and giving it more air than it otherwise should have? And my answer to that is, well, yes, probably, but it's still really important to the community that it's called out and condemned. So that would be my answer to the question.
Thank you, Teresa. Here's another question. My granddaughter just turned 22, but when she was in high school, she was told the Holocaust was a hoax. She came home and announced what she had learned that day. She refused to listen to her family when trying to explain the truth to her. What are ways to help her to understand it was not a hoax? And I know you were just talking about resources that are available regarding the Holocaust, but I would like to know your response to this question.
It is, and I mean, I hope that that's not what she was taught in school by a teacher.
Sounds like she was. Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think that even if that was 5 or 6 years ago when she was in high school, that the school principal needs to be informed that the teacher taught that in class, because that's incredibly sad to hear. So there are there are some really amazing documentaries. Ken Burns just came out, PBS and Ken Burns just came out with a documentary about the Holocaust. I probably would start with documentary film and reading, and then also there's the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. There are amazing Holocaust museums in Los Angeles, and there are Holocaust survivors who will come and talk to groups in different settings. In the end of January is Holocaust Remembrance Day, where survivors will speak. Bring her to one of those events. There are many opportunities to bring educated young women into educational settings like museums, like synagogues where a survivor is speaking, and let her listen and let her hear and let her see.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Another question. How can the ADL, and this is a really long question, so I'm going to go ahead and bounce around. How can the ADL claim to support justice for Black people when the ADL is the single largest non-governmental police trainer in the country. These trainings deepen the militarized, racialized policing of US neighborhoods and communities of color as counterinsurgent human terrain. How can the ADL claim they support justice for Black people? So this was a much longer question, but yes.
One of the focuses that we have is on hate crime and anti-bias training and training about extremism. So I'm sorry that the person who wrote that question has that feeling about ADL and the work that we do with law enforcement, because it's just the opposite. We work very hard with not just law enforcement, but with teachers, with other groups who call us in, with corporate engagement to bring anti-bias training to these agencies. And as a professional organization, we are made up of, yes, Jewish professionals, but also amongst our ranks, I think less than half of us are Jewish. Many of us are people of color. And many of the folks that we have as workshop leaders and trainers are also people of color. And we work very hard to bring excellent anti-bias education to law enforcement. So I know that there is tension in our communities between folks and law enforcement. I saw it when I was a prosecutor, and I see it as a member of the community, and I see it here at ADL. But I would be happy to take some time and speak with that person and talk to them about the really good work that we do in trying to create inclusive and safe policing.
Okay, so thank you, Teresa, for your response. And I want to ask one more question that is here. Is the erasure replacement of historical facts with alternative facts by deniers directly related to their inability to embrace or their desire to ignore the horrors of historical reality?
A great question. I think it's probably sometimes a desire to ignore it because it's too painful, but I think more often than not, it's rooted in a dislike of the group that whose painful past they're trying to erase.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and stop here. There are many questions that have been posed by the audience, and I just want to say thank you, audience, for all of your questions. And Teresa, thank you so much for taking time out of your very, very busy day to come and be here and join me in conversation. I've enjoyed hearing from you, and I know the audience has too. So I just want to thank you very much. I appreciate you.
And thank you so much. And thank you to everybody also for listening, and thank you for inviting me. This has been really interesting for me. And I didn't get a chance to read all the questions, or maybe you can save them and copy paste them. And I like the hearts and the clappy hands to all of you also. This is such an important conversation, and I feel like we could have spent hours together really diving in and understanding and working through more. So thank you very much.
So thank you for coming, and I hope to see you at the other sessions. Thank you again, Teresa. Okay, bye.